Can you imagine a country known as the Millionaire of America? That was Venezuela just a few decades ago. In the 1970s and 80s, this nation not only led Latin America in economic development, but also competed on a global scale. It was known as the Saudi Venezuela, a land where oil didn't just fuel the economy, it shaped the lifestyle of millions. Middle-class families could afford homes, cars, and even world travel without financial worries. Skyscrapers, highways, and top-tier universities stood as symbols of modernization, promising a bright future. But how did this economic powerhouse become a country trapped in crisis? Today, we'll dive into life in Venezuela before Hugo Chávez, a time when the nation experienced its greatest boom, yet unknowingly sowed the seeds of future challenges. Join us as we uncover a story of contrasts, where prosperity coexisted with deep inequalities. Get ready for a journey to the past that reveals not just what was, but what could have been. Today, Venezuela faces one of the deepest crises in its history. A nation that was once a symbol of prosperity in Latin America now grapples with skyrocketing poverty, inequality, and mass migration. Recent statistics reveal that over 80% of the population lives in poverty, and millions of Venezuelans have left the country in search of better opportunities. The economic crisis has taken a devastating toll on daily life. Wages for most workers are insufficient to cover basic needs like food and medicine. Hyperinflation has obliterated the value of the local currency, rendering cash nearly useless. Meanwhile, shortages of essential goods have led to long lines at supermarkets and pharmacies, leaving many families without access to basic necessities. The country's infrastructure is also in shambles. Years of neglect and lack of investment have caused frequent power outages, unreliable water supplies, and a collapse of the public transportation system. Hospitals are on the brink of collapse, lacking the equipment and medicine necessary to care for patients adequately. Adding to the turmoil is political polarization, with a government facing constant accusations of authoritarianism and corruption while cracking down on the opposition and curbing citizens' freedoms. This grim reality has eroded hope for many Venezuelans, forcing them to either emigrate or survive under extremely challenging conditions. This is today's Venezuela, marked by poverty and despair. Yet not so long ago, it was a prosperous and modern country, welcoming thousands of foreigners seeking better lives and job opportunities. So, what happened? Let's take a closer look. A few decades ago, Venezuela was synonymous with wealth and progress. Thanks to its vast oil reserves, the country experienced an economic boom that positioned it as the most prosperous in Latin America. Between the 1950s and early 1980s, oil was not only the backbone of the economy, but also the foundation of a lifestyle many envied. The oil bonanza brought unprecedented economic stability. The Venezuelan currency, the bolívar, was strong and stable, giving citizens impressive purchasing power. People could travel abroad, buy homes, cars, and even properties in places like Miami, which became a favorite destination for middle and upper-class families. Venezuela even held the title of the world's largest consumer of whiskey. A popular phrase of the time summed up the spirit of those years: "It's cheap. Give me two." The progress wasn't only reflected in the lifestyle. During this period, under the leadership of Marcos Pérez Jiménez and his successors, Venezuela experienced an infrastructure boom. Modern highways were built to connect the country, along with state-of-the-art hospitals, prestigious universities, and skyscrapers that transformed the cities. Projects like the Orinoco Steelworks and the Guri hydroelectric plant showcased the country's capacity for innovation and development. Caracas, the capital, became a symbol of modernity and opulence in Latin America. Known for its skyscrapers, wide avenues, and cutting-edge architectural projects, the city thrived during the oil boom. Iconic structures like the Caracas-La Guaira highway connected the capital to the airport and seaport, facilitating the flow of goods and people in the midst of Venezuela's economic prosperity. Downtown Caracas and its surrounding areas were vibrant, boasting luxury stores, high-end restaurants, and a nightlife that rivaled major capitals worldwide. Hotels like the Caracas Hilton, now Alba Caracas, and cultural landmarks like the Teresa Carreño Theater reflected the city's level of sophistication and development. It's striking to compare this with the current state of Venezuela, isn't it? However, not everything was perfect. While the middle and upper classes thrived, the working class remained in precarious conditions. Inequality ran deep, and despite improvements in education and healthcare, many communities didn't benefit from the progress. This contrast between the prosperity of some and the neglect of others set the stage for the radical changes that would come years later with Hugo Chávez. It's time to explore why this happened. Behind the visible economic advancements and urban development, structural issues and inequalities were brewing, problems that would play a decisive role in the country's future. One of the most glaring issues was the stark social inequality. While the middle and upper classes enjoyed the oil boom, many low-income families were left out of the progress. In rural areas and poorer urban neighborhoods, access to basic services like education, healthcare, and housing remained limited. Despite the construction of world-class universities and hospitals, much of the population couldn't take advantage of them, perpetuating a cycle of poverty. Corruption also began to erode the country's institutions. The oil revenues, which should have been used to drive development, often ended up in the hands of political and economic elites. Large state contracts and resource management became tools for enriching a select few, leaving the population's real needs unmet. By the late 1980s, the situation shifted dramatically. A drop in oil prices hit Venezuela's economy hard, exposing just how dependent the country was on this resource. Without the petrodollar sustaining the system, inflation soared, unemployment rose, and poverty skyrocketed. This economic collapse triggered social unrest, culminating in the Caracazo of 1989, a wave of protests and looting that left hundreds dead and marked a turning point in the country's history. This period of crisis revealed the cracks in Venezuela's economic and social model. The promises of prosperity from previous decades crumbled, leaving a divided and vulnerable nation, one ready to embrace a leader promising profound change. It was during this time that the figure of Hugo Chávez began to rise, presenting himself as the country's savior. In 1992, Chávez led an attempted coup d'état which, despite its failure, turned him into a symbol of rebellion for many Venezuelans. His arrest and subsequent release in 1994 only solidified his image as a leader willing to challenge the corrupt system that had ruled the country for decades. In 1998, with a message of social justice and promises to redistribute wealth, Chávez won the presidential election with broad popular support. His rise to power marked the beginning of a new era for Venezuela. Chávez spearheaded radical changes, including drafting a new constitution and implementing social policies aimed at helping the poorest segments of the population. The oil boom of the 2000s allowed Chávez to finance programs such as the Bolivarian missions, which provided free access to education, healthcare, and housing for millions of Venezuelans. However, these social advancements were accompanied by increasing state control over the economy and institutions, as well as escalating political polarization. As Chávez solidified his power, he radicalized his rhetoric and policies, expropriating private companies and promoting an economic model centered on 21st century socialism. While these measures garnered support among his followers, they also led to a growing dependency on the state and a decline in private investment, further weakening the non-oil economy. The following years were marked by expanding corruption, the erosion of democratic institutions, and an increasingly fragile economy. By the end of his presidency, though he still enjoyed strong popular support, The country was on the path to an economic and social crisis that worsened after his death in 2013. After Chavez's passing, Nicolás Maduro took his place. But instead of stabilizing the country, economic and social problems deepened. The collapse of oil prices, rampant corruption, and a lack of investment in productive sectors plunged Venezuela into an unprecedented crisis. Hyperinflation rendered the bolívar practically worthless, while shortages of food and medicine hit the population hard. Millions of Venezuelans were forced to emigrate in search of better opportunities. What was once Latin America's wealthiest country, known as the Saudi Venezuela, now faces alarming levels of poverty and inequality. Comparing today's Venezuela with the country that existed before 21st century socialism inevitably brings a deep sense of nostalgia for a nation that was once a symbol of modernity and prosperity. Venezuela was a place where opportunities seemed endless, where cities gleamed with modern skyscrapers, and a vibrant middle class enjoyed one of the highest purchasing powers in Latin America. Imagine for a moment if the country had taken a different path. If the wealth from oil had been used equitably, invested in diverse industries, and building a sustainable economic system. Perhaps today we would be talking about a Venezuela rivaling the world's great powers. Caracas, once a beacon of luxury and modernity in the 1970s, could now be an enviable metropolis celebrated for its infrastructure, technology, and quality of life. Generations of young professionals who emigrated might have found opportunities to innovate, grow, and contribute to their nation's development within their own borders. It's impossible not to wonder, what would Venezuela look like today if the decisions of the past had been different? Could it have been a model for Latin America, a dream destination for those seeking prosperity and stability? The story of Saudi Venezuela reminds us of the immense potential this nation holds, a potential that could still be reclaimed with the right choices.